The basic procedure for conducting the Trithemius experiment of drawing spirits into crystals is very simple and straightforward. In the barest sense, the only equipment required is a round table and 7 planetary names, their associated angels, and symbols written in a double ring. A triangle is drawn or engraved in the center of the table, and some scrying device is set up in the very center. Typically, a time of preparation is undergone. Then, at the correct day and hour, the call, invocation, is performed for the desired angel to appear while the Magus gazes at the scrying device. If the above process seems complicated enough, then this book might be difficult to digest. Frater Ashen Chassan, Gateways Through Stone and Circle. A very interesting book. It's called Gateways Through Stone and Circle, a manual of evocation from the planetary intelligences. It's a 2014 edition, Nephilim Press. That's correct, right? So it's really, really interesting. Then you have a second one, which we will talk about in a second episode of this, which is called Gateways Through Light and Shadow, the true relation of what transpired between Frater Ashen Chassan with his crier, Ben Maxtefan, and the spirits. This is an Azoth Press 2016, very beautiful, with portraits of spirit by Alex McCavey. It's really, really interesting. Now, the first question that I have for you is, who was this book originally written for, and with what purpose?
Well, the book, before it became a book, was simply a collection of records, of magical records, that I had experimenting with the art of drawing spirits into crystals. It wasn't really intended originally to be published. It was something that I was going to share with a few fellow magicians in the Gentlemen of Jupiter, which is a group that I'm a part of. And as I began working through the system and making the tools, I just made sure to jot down all of the details and experiences that I was having. And when I started having encounters with these angelic beings, I made sure to make copious notes. And how it became, or how it got into book form, was one of the magicians from that group is a published author as well. And he was like, "This is amazing. You should have this published. You know, the readers in the greater occult world, should really read what you're doing." And I was really unsure on first. I hadn't come much to the public eye with my magical working. I was keeping everything at first myself, and then with just a few select ceremonial magicians. And the idea of publishing a book was completely novel, no pun intended, but just an idea I'd never considered. I didn't even think that I was quite a writer or a good writer, or was totally unsure if anyone would even care to read what I had to write in the first place. So it was, it was kind of a very spontaneous thing when I wrote the first book. And of course it had I had to develop it and put more detail into it as it went along, as when I started working with my publisher and developing the first book. But it just really seemed to come together, and everyone that I had review it seemed to really enjoy it. So I decided to go for it.
Well, let me just get something out of the way. You are a good writer. Just
well,
so
thank
you know.
you very much. I appreciate it.
Just so you know. Okay, so, and when you wrote the first book, so we're talking about Gateways Through Stone and Circle, a manual of evocation from the planetary intelligences. Who do you write this book for? This was for that group, for the students in general? Who was the aim or the impetus for you to write this book?
Correct. It was for the Gentlemen of Jupiter, because a few of us were using the drawing spirits in the crystals, the Trithemius, a formula that's found in the Magus. And each of us were kind of going about this our own way. Specifically, Frater Rufus Opus and myself and a few others were experimenting with this. And the notes and my process was intended originally for them, besides myself, to kind of share and collaborate to see, how we could, how well we could work this art and what we could make it do for ourselves.
Now, drawing spirits into crystals, it's very interesting because we need to go into the magic and philosophy of Trithemius. Of drawing spirits into crystals, which is this is something that comes out of the Magus, right? And
Correct.
One of the things that I really like about your book is that it comes with an historical review on and summary of who Trithemius was, and for us to have a contextualization, historically speaking, of what are we dealing here with, and where this author comes from, where is his background, etc., etc. Readers might or listeners might want to look at the Magus, which is where this ritual is actually in, nowadays more available now in your book as well. What is necessary in terms of equipment to accomplish this?
That's the big question, and for myself, my answer is going to differ quite drastically from someone like Frater Rufus Opus, or someone that is coming at this in a purely different form than what it's written. But I guess to answer the question, I'd have to explain why it is the way that I practice magic, ceremonial magic, to begin with. And for myself, if I'm doing work from a grimoire, from a classical book of magic, I may study associated texts, earlier workings that contributed or developed the grimoire that I'm working from, but I come resting upon whatever art that I'm practicing, and I stick to that. I try to duplicate what's written down in a particular manuscript that I'm working from, and if it says, gold is needed, if it's saying, these whatever materials it mentions, I use those, and I don't, supplement or try to rationalize or guess or, just kind of do away with things because they're expensive, they're inconvenient, they're time consuming. I want to practice exactly as it's written first and experiment with the actual process before I make any alterations, before I try to do anything differently or change it up. So that's the way that I practice as a magician. So as far as what's needed, my simple answer is, well, whatever's mentioned in the art of drawing spirits into crystals, which is not very much. As far as grimoire traditions and art forms go, it's definitely one of the simplest ones out there. The initial tools are slightly complex as far as the scrying apparatus and the table and the wand and this thing, but the circle and the invocations are very simple, straightforward, easy to remember, and the whole process itself is, it fits on one typed page. It's very short. So my recommendations is, from people, whether they have differing religious or spiritual outlooks, whether they don't quite agree with the kind of arcane outlook of how these grimoires were written. If they're interested in this art form, I always suggest that they put those aside and try to understand what this whole art form is coming across at, what it's actually doing, before just picking out the bits and pieces that you like and then running with your own thing. My success has led to honoring these traditions as they are and working from that first, and then making alterations as I gain experience, not the other way around.
The original concept of this book, as you say, was to guide and instruct a serious practitioner in a by-the-book method of drawing spirits into crystals. We're very clear about your intentions and how precise you want to be in terms of following exactly what was set up in the magical text. However, you have included personal findings as well. What have you included that would help the practitioner to attain a better result at this enterprise?
Sure. So one of the first things that I included personally was what I deemed the altar of the stars, and this is a wooden construct that I make that's not mentioned or included in the grimoire.
Mm-hmm.
And the first and overlaying purpose of it is to bring the scrying apparatus, the pedestal, as well as the table of practice or holy table, in within eye's view, within a level-headed view. If you were sitting down within a magic circle, or if you were standing, so you wouldn't have to crane your neck to look up or down, that it would be pretty much at eye level. So if you as the operator and or scryer are sitting to look into the crystal, I made this altar of the stars to be arranged where, when I'm sitting, I'm looking directly at, the crystal without having to have my head tilted in an uncomfortable position. And people that are used to actually doing arcane, magical, and ritual work, especially scrying, will immediately notice that if you're not used to sitting down with your back straight and looking at something for long periods of time, it is taxing. You're going to get cramps. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's hard to keep your focus if that's not something that you're adept at and that you don't practice at quite a bit. And it helps with your magical practice if your implements and everything are arranged where it makes sense, where you can look straight ahead, where you're not, worried about kinking your neck because you're looking in an odd kind of space. So it's almost like creating a workspace at your workstation, how they have things that have, ergonomically, come into better play because, people are there a lot. Where it's the same thing with your magical implements. If it's not specified that, these things have to be there, then, those are places you can fill in the blanks as you begin to practice, to put things at eye level, to make things where they make sense. So that was one thing. Mm-hmm. But I started to include other things like traditional, church extended lighter and candle snuffer that they use, so that I could light, the altars without having to step out of the circle or extend too far. Things, of course, like the tong for lighting the incense and the charcoals and everything, which, would seem commonplace, but they're not mentioned in the grimoire. There are a lot of things in there that they figure that if people do these practices, that of course they would include that they're not going to light the charcoals with their fingers and everything under a flame, this kind of thing. So
it's really interesting to see the book and to read it, and then you say, you know what, we need kind of like an altar here that would have like the right height so that we can do that properly. You talk about rereading the rituals over and over until you have a clear image of them, so that they are really clear and set up in your mind. Mm-hmm. One of the things that you say in the book is, and this is actually one of the titles, or based on the title of the book, what is the method to the madness in working with the grimoires?
So the method to the madness is the step-by-step, almost scientific process of actually conducting this ritual. The beginning things that are needed to make sure that, before you just start jumping in a circle, you can have all the implements arranged, but if you don't understand the process of how to conduct a sacred ritual, how to get yourself into a space and a mind frame where every part of you is convinced that you're going to be conversing with, an unseen entity that is unseen at first, but a very powerful, a very real one, and not just conducting mind games. These are all things that take a lot of study, that take a lot of practice. And to be able to gaze into a scrying implement and to receive a clear enough picture where you can see something clearly, you can hear them so that you can gather, information. And this is part of this process in developing and the steps of, very, very serious considerations that, when I do these exercises, I'm not basing things on just, feelings or what I think I hear in my mind, or, I get this impression or that. Those kind of things I do not consider successful vocation. Other people talk about that. That's fine for them if that's what they want. But for myself and the way that I consider spiritual conversation and interaction, that's not good enough. Clear, concise communication, visual and auditory exchange, where I can record something, I can have an exchange with the spirit where I'm getting detailed information, not vague yes or no answers, not something that could be taken this way or that way, but something that I can record down and I can really take into consideration afterwards.
In order to understand better the procedure of drawing spirits into crystals, it is imperative to know a little bit more about the author. We talked about this before. I mentioned Trithemius before. What can you tell us about Trithemius that would help on a deeper understanding of the technique and the ritual procedure of the drawing spirits into crystals?
Well, first of all, what listeners have to understand about Trithemius is that he is a little bit of a name drop, almost like Solomon is related to a lot of the Solomonic magic texts, where it is more unlikely that he had a direct hand in actually authoring the process of drawing spirits into crystals. I mean, he may have, and some of his writings could allude to techniques and definitely inspired later writers, but it's, from everything that I've researched and other magicians have researched, there's no direct correspondence that we found or seen where Trithemius, is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the author. But going through this, there's several related grimoires and texts that the process is, very, very similar and spot on to what is described in drawing spirits into crystals. And I go through this in the book as well, where you're going to find a lot of what's found in Agrippa's fourth book of occult philosophy. You're going to find things from the grimoire of Turiel and other ones where there's so many striking similarities that you can see there was kind of a common, if nothing else, inspiration to the what's found in the Magus. So the Magus itself, with the other writings, of course, being heavily influenced, if not directly transcribed from earlier sources from Agrippa and other things like that. So
yeah. Now, how exactly, in your opinion, magicians focus their will and their attention when using magic?
I think for magicians, especially ones that engage in true, what I call and what I consider true evocation and spiritual interaction, I do believe that they have to have been born with at least an aptitude for it. They really must have, at least the successful ones that I acknowledge and that I consider, it's someone that has had early kind of spiritual, interesting encounters ever since they were young, or at least through puberty. So something that is inherent. And then magicians are ones that develop that. They use their intellect. They use their will to study and focus. And in these practices, scrying in itself is a discipline. It's something sitting down and clearing your mind. It is entering into a meditative state because you have to sit and look at something that there's no stimuli at first. There's no feedback. There's nothing. But you have to focus, your concentration past the nothingness. You've got to be able to keep your will and intention engaged and wanting to access something that is not, readily seen or experienced initially. And I think that's part of training that will, training that those abilities and sharpening those. And it's not guaranteed for everyone. And different people have come up with different techniques to focus their mind and will. But I think for ancient magicians, a lot of it was just doing these practices. And even if it didn't succeed the first however many times, to keep doing it, to keep studying the material, to keep practicing this craft until success became more eminent and it gradually increased in fruitfulness and productivity.
Which is very interesting because in the book you mentioned that you lived for quite a while alone, and that helped you very much because
For sure.
you trained a lot alone until you got to this point where you can actually do this. Now, you say that during your evocations, the time that you felt more successful was when you set aside all expectations and assumptions. What lies in the core of this success then?
I think it's a culmination of certain variables coming together. I do think that a lot relies on going through, and it's part of the secret to the title, they are gateways, being able to pass through a certain kind of threshold, whether that threshold has any sort of symbolic significance or not. There is definitely an inside to outside, or at least a going through of struggling with this material or having it vague or a little even uncertain, even if you totally believe it, if it's totally verifiable. I mean, you want to, but until you gain that experience, until you move through that threshold of wanting to, and then, yes, I am experiencing this and I'm beholding them, I can hear them, I can see them. There's still that point in the mind that has a lot of doubt, that has a lot of wonder. And I think there just is, so much having to move past that to really go through those gateways, even in the face of uncertainty, to make, to really accomplish these goals of the magicians. And the ones that I've seen succeed are the ones that have kept going even past doubt and even past these frustrations of experiments that failed for them before.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, last equinox, which was just now, I actually have an ebony pedestal, and I showed it to one of my friends, and I said, this is where invoking spirits into crystal, this is where it happens, and I'm very excited. I'm going to interview this gentleman, and he actually goes through this, and he wrote 2 books about it, and I'm very excited. And she asked, what kind of spirits? And I said, angels. And she said, what? What do you mean angels? So the next question is, why is it a bit naive to expect a full evocation of an archangel into a circle or into a crystal sphere?
I think it's naive to expect that the full and concentrated force of what those spirits are in their entirety to be within your crystal or within your circle is naive. And even when my scryer and I were both in the circle and we both gasped because the entire room lit up and because sparkly things were floating through the air, and the phenomenon was amazing, and we felt, and we were in the midst of extreme power and extreme presence. There was no question, but there was also no question in either one of our minds that we could perceive all of what that spirit or that angel was. And there was just a knowing that, yeah, they're aware of us and they're here communicating with us, but they're not all here, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's a part of them that is flooding our senses and that is communicating with us, but this being is way beyond what we're able to perceive and even comprehend. And I don't think either one of us were ever naive, even when I was by myself, to think that what I was seeing, what I was experiencing was the be-all and end-all of what that being was, not
mm-hmm.
for a moment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
now,
if that puts into perspective.
She's going to be very happy. Is there any difference between time and space as we know it in relation to what is represent for the angelic beings, for instance?
So my understanding through working with these beings, through conversing with them and talking, is that time and space is a very, very different concept, if anything, for these beings, for any spirit. especially space, is an entirely different consideration. The practice of evocation itself is kind of a paradoxical practice where you're bringing something that is not confinable by space and honestly not constrainable by time in the way that we understand it, or that it affects things physically. And we're attempting to do just that for a moment in time that allows us to speak in a way that we can comprehend, in a way that we can have exchange with this being, so that it's, you know, we can understand it, so that we can see it. Just as the spirits themselves, the angels, when they appear to us, when any spirit appears to us, it would be extremely naive to think that that spirit looks like that somewhere, that it just, you know, it has this makeup and it's, you know, it looks like a person or animal or combination of those things wherever it is. You know, that's ludicrous. It doesn't need that. When we're viewing it, we're comprehending something that is completely symbolically energetic. It's what their office, it's what their energy is about. It's kind of an identifying portrayal. And everything that we see and everything that we hear from them, the whole interaction is part of their makeup coming across to us in ways that we can understand. But just when I perceive them, and it's very clear, they're very solid, and yes, I can hear them, but I also understand at that same exact time that that's not how they're going about doing their own thing in their own plane of existence. That would be completely unnecessary. So, you know, if people are kind of new to the concept of, you know, angels and spirits, and, you know, why would they have wings, or why would they, you know, look like this? And, you know, this is why. This is a way that we can understand them. That, I mean, they speak English because that's what I understand in words, but that doesn't mean they use English for their language.
Of course, yeah.
So, you know, all of these things I kind of take it, I'm used to, so, you know, it doesn't really boggle my mind that much anymore. I just kind of understand that as, you know, being the filter in which these exchanges can take place, so that, you know, evocation exchange can happen.
Right. Let's go back to the books, and, you know, anyone that actually had a little bit of time to look at the books or studied a little bit of the grimoires, you know, these various books, historic books of magic, contain rituals and procedures that have undergone a variety of inclusions, additions, and you talk about this, translations, interpretations, I mean, you name it. And so, as we know, we do recognize that these additions and translations, and in our analysis of the various works, how is then possible for a magician today to successfully accomplish conjuration of spirits with all of these mistakes, alterations, additions, and all of that?
It is one of the biggest questions that modern day magicians just love to debate and argue and talk and discuss over it. And I still enjoy it to this day, but it's still a very simple thing to me. And I look at it in this way, that you know, for some people that do become armchair magicians, or they become frustrated, is because they're on the search for some sort of pure source, some sort of written source of magic that has no alterations, no errors, no personalizations, and they're never going to find it. There's always something that came from something else, and something that originated, even if it was taught directly from a spirit, it went through the filter of the magician, of the person, of the human, that it went through. So we can look at spiritual text, religious text, and magical text. And the variable that you're not going to be able to remove is the human variable. And that human variable is going to be filled with errors. It is not a complete, clear, and concise data exchange. It never has been, never will be. And for some people, that's frustrating because they want some sort of level of certainty. There is no certainty in that aspect for magic, no matter which way people try to argue it. But within that, there's got to be a healthy balance. And the way I've found the balance is that I will take a text of magic, even something like one of the more recent translations of the Goetia, the Lemegeton, which is argued, and it's got tons of versions and comes from many different earlier sources. But when it's one of the first ones that I began working through, and I chose the manuscript that I was going to follow, and I followed it to a T. And after one huge, tremendous failure of getting getting absolutely nothing from it, I tried it again, not altering and not throwing it to the wind, but the second time that I attempted it, I had the success I was looking for. I was able to achieve it. And it was not because the source was a pure source. What I can usually count on is that a lot of these grimoires, one of these copyists, one of the people that had these materials, practiced it. They followed the recipes and the recommendations and everything that was written as it was, and they practiced and they achieved it, and they kept it around. It was obviously valuable enough for them to keep it and or make slight alterations later on because they were actually practicing from it, and they added something. They included something, like the lion skin belt with the names. I mean, that's something that came later on, but it seems doubtful to me that somebody said, "Oh, this looks like a good idea. I think I read something about this, so I'm gonna make this detailed paragraph about this belt and just put it in there, but I'm not going to do it myself." My view is, somebody was either instructed by one of the spirits or an angel, or they did have this inspiration to kind of do this, and that became their practice. So they included it in their version of the grimoire. So when I begin, I take the grimoire as it is, and I work from it, and I see what kind of results can be garnered from it without trying to change it or impose my own idealisms or this and that. I really want to get an idea of where this magician was coming from the best that I can. And then once I feel like I've kind of owned the material, I've practiced it, I've made it mine, then as I start working with it, I take the advice of some of the spirits that I trust, or the angels, or what I've learned, or what really doesn't seem to work, or what works really well. And I base my alterations or any kind of developments on experience rather than presumption, rather than thinking I understand what it's just symbolic and it's just this or just that. And I've never gone back at that, because just about every time I've had a presumption about how something would go, about what a certain tool meant, about what one of the invocations meant, and it was something completely different or something I'd never considered after I used it in practice. I got a whole new understanding about why they did what they did, or why the grimoire was written how it was written, and that's why I practice the way I do.
How does the correct spirit arrive when a magician calls it by the incorrectly pronounced name?
Well, I've loved this practice because experiment has shown that there's a lot of things leading up to the spirit coming. It's its direction. Yes, it's its name, but if you have its name written in part of the circle, if you have its sigil on the layman, there's a few different corresponding pieces to ritual that are intended to be safeguards to call the right spirit. Another reason to the madness in the process of classical evocation is so you get the correct spirit. But even when that happens, when a spirit arrives, in all classical, especially Solomonic based evocation, you are to question the spirit and have it answer to, now it's like the divine name. You'd use the divine names of God or something for it to swear that it's this or that spirit. Before, even in ancient Egyptian evocation, it would be the god or high spirit that was directly above it, to have it swear by that it would be its correct name and be the correct spirit. And every time that I've done this, I've never gotten a yes, no. It's always been yes, I am, and it also gives like some sort of declaration, some sort of introduction that confirms its identity.
And this is a part of classical evocation that I think is really important, should not be remiss, because I haven't had many instances myself where the incorrect spirit has arrived, but from everything I've read, it seems like it is possible, and that a magician needs to be sure that they are talking to the entity that they're intending when something arrives.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, why do you think that for you, the appearance of angels is secondary to the signs of their arrival and presence?
I think it's, especially in my earlier practice, it is just something that is very spontaneous. It really stands out to me because there's a point where nothing is really going on, or nothing is perceivable, and then all of a sudden something is. Mm-hmm. There's something there. I've done these invocations where it's either been by myself or me with my scryer, and I'm going through the invocations, and it's kind of still, and it's just kind of an empty room. Even when my voice has felt powerful, I know it's echoing out. There's kind of a stillness, and I think it's that point right before going through that gateway where it's still seemingly mundane. It's almost like that last second where I think for some people, hey, you can start imagining and making things up at this point because you don't want to fail, or you're sticking to integrity and you're going to be patient and wait for the spirit to make the first move. And I think that's important, that it is patient, and you have to kind of hold a place of emptiness, of stillness, and not trying to expect this or that, or straining to perceive this or that, but really waiting to just see if anything happens. And so when something arrives and everything, it's been pretty dynamic, and it's there's sights, there's smells, there's sounds that go on. A lot of times it seems like all of my senses are almost being bombarding, where you're not wondering if something's there. It's like, whoa, something is here.
It's
happened. Yes, exactly.
Now, interesting enough, some of the appearances of the angels will change from every instance of invocation. Sometimes, they bring something different. Or why do you think that this occurs?
Again, I think there's a few variables of why this might happen, and the magician has to be, or a scryer needs to be attentive, because their appearance is it's also a part of their communication. If you have the correct spirit, but they're appearing differently, there's a reason for it. There's a certain kind of communication coming across about how they're portraying to them. What they look like is saying a lot about what their energy not only is, but how it relates to the person perceiving them. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that is, there's going to be one aspect, even astrologically, that during this spirit's hour, so to speak, when we're contacting it, if it's representing itself like these archangels do through this process, through planetary aspects, that planetary aspect, how it's communicating with the rest of the planets, what kind of alignments and elections are going on at that time, and what kind of strengths, weaknesses, or if there's any conflict, then you might get some visual or some auditory representation even through that about how strong is their energy, what particular things are they showing forth about that planetary aspect right now. Is it all positive? Is it more negative? Or is there an interesting mix in between? And also the person, everything down from their natal, their signs in particular, and how their energy relates to the planetary aspects that spirit is issuing forth, I think, can have some sort of influence, because it is a form of communication. But it should all be recognizable. I mean, if you're conjuring Archangel Michael, and it appears, and all of a sudden all you get is like a fish, on a distance. Well, you have to question, well, is this the right spirit? What happened? Because this is not, a typical form that, usually represents this entity. So if it's way off, that's something to consider. That's something to record of, okay, how did this happen?
Right.
But the slight variations, I think, can just give further information about what that being is portraying to the scryer or magician.
Especially when this is like done in sequence, right? So you invoke one time and then another time, and it's layers of things that are revealed to you and as you go along.
Definitely.
There is a certain order in who you invoke first, and I mean you followed this order. It is advised to invoke first certain spirits. You talk about Cassio being your first experience of vocation that you've prepared for years using this method. Why was it important for you to invoke or call him first?
Initially, it was just the way that I studied kind of the planetary progressions and the way that I was kind of studying the planetary aspects. But I think it was important for me that I begin with Cassio too, because it really had a clearing out effect and kind of a real direct entering into that spirit world and laying the foundation of my practice. And as I started studying this more, I really realized, this I think was good for me, but I don't know if it would be appropriate for everyone. Other magicians, such as Aaron Leach, and I mean, he suggests, he's working with the moon first, which makes sense. I mean, it's the entry gateway into the higher celestial realms. With Gabrielle and Shore. For whatever reason, though, both myself and when I started working with my scryer, we always ended with the moon. It kind of progressed on that naturally when I was planning things out. And through my practices, that became evident that was important. And I think it was sort of a clearing and working almost backwards from these spheres and finalizing with this kind of lunar energy was more or less kind of solidifying these experiences and making them more not only palpable but powerful for us, so that we could go back through working in any kind of order with any kind of planetary aspect that we chose or needed. And I think that was very interesting that way, but not necessarily needed for everybody's individual experience.
Now, your first evocation of Cassio is described in the book. What was the most important teaching coming out of this experience for you?
Well, without giving anything away, the beauty of that interaction was when my scryer and I went back and conjured Cassio a second time, and this time when the two of us was in there, and I asked the archangel specifically for myself, these images that he was showing me, because I still was unclear. I'm like, what was the deal of these three beings riding on a horse and the skull and the foreground and these kind of things. And the answers I received are recorded in gateways through light and shadow. Yes. And they totally blew me away. And I was like, it was neat to see, because they were answers that were revealed later. I mean, I would have never have guessed at them, but they were very pertinent, and it was neat because he was definitely showing me something that would have significance in later years and later magical workings and in later parts of my life that were very impacting. But of course, like many powerful spirits, they never just give it to you straight, and you have to kind of figuring out, which I've come to understand is important, way more important, getting the straight literal answer, because an answer in simple data is nowhere near as useful or meaningful as an answer learned and processed and experienced, in due time. It's something that you can actually own and integrate into yourself. And I've learned to appreciate those type of answers a lot more as I've worked with them.
you described Anael as quite obvious female, and I'm quoting you. My question is, why do we perceive gender in angels? Do you think that this is connected with an human condition that we are in, therefore conditioning our perception of gender, or why do you think that is?
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some filters within each person about what the archetype of male and female means and what kind of aspects, energies, correlations go along with what that means. Just like the yin and yang, these other kind of polarities that you find in other cultures are often attributed masculine or feminine correspondence. And it's not something that, of course, the angel itself, can't be a man or a woman, or to kind of view him in that way in a physical sense is ridiculous. But there's, powerful archetypes and symmetry of energy of what these energies mean. And both my scryer and myself and I don't know any magicians personally that I can think of that is conversed with this being and seeing it male. And not that would be wrong, but there is so much about this this archangel related to Venus, and even as its namesake is related in the Hebraic tradition, everything that has this very divine feminine role, this energy. It's just very, very palpable. And I think that it appearing in these female forms just is a perfect match for how we're trying to perceive it. And it goes as far as that. It's just how the entity comes across, and it's it's amazing. But it's something even beyond that, because with the interaction, it's such an amazing representation of what I can perceive as divine feminine, of these powerful feminine aspects, and it's portrayed to the best of my ability to perceive this as the archangel brings it across to me, and it seems perfect in its way. I'm sure that if I evoked it one time and it decided to look more male, I'm sure there would be some sort of reasoning, some sort of lesson or aspect, something that was bringing across that was important in that way. So that's pretty much how it goes across. But to fix a gender for any of these archangels, they're not people, they're not humans. So they're I totally understand that when they appear when any non-human entity appears anthropomorphic, when they look like people, it's because we're used to talking to other people, and it's hard to have conversations as like. Right. Which is like in the Heptameron. They might appear as a sword or a shirt. Well, it's difficult to hold a communication unless you're used to talking with a sword or a shirt. It's easier to talk to something that resembles human. And I totally understand that's why they appear that way, so that, it's another aspect in evocation that allows communication and exchange to take place without huge distraction.
Why do you think, now we're jumping a little bit, that it is essential to establish a strong connection and relationship with angels before invoking demons?
The way that I see it, and through my practice with evocation, is that these angelic beings represent extremely potent and far-reaching powers. And even though we're not able to perceive the full extent of what that means, we can relate these archangels to planetary aspects. But from my understanding, that's just like one strand of one way that they can come across to us, that they not only influence us, but influence creation, the world, and whatever other parts of existence that they have their quote unquote fingers in. But when you're dealing with them, you're aligning yourself in a certain way, and dare I say, you're going through a sort of initiation, more or less a true initiation, just by being in their presence. And what I mean by that is that whatever is in you internally that understands what these energies mean, whether they be planetary or whatever, with angels, it's constructed in an organized and very powerful way that I think is, if it's worked in the same way, it's harmonious. It can be beneficial for not only your psychological makeup, but your physical and other things as you go through, as long as you're working with the angel correctly. It would be a false assumption to say that angels, as a general term, are positive things to humans. That's not correct at all, because some of them can be very dangerous, and even the beneficial angels, if you're not working with the correct part of their powers, can be very disrupting to a person, worse so than demons. But with these other demonic and other entities, they can be worked with. And what I've learned from the angels' perspective is that their part in creation is just as normal as theirs and anything else in existence. Like there's no conflict with them that they exist, but they do understand how some of these beings can create chaos in human beings' lives. And so in this, this is why you see the magician binding and making sure that they have the authority of either a higher god or the commanding angel, to make sure that the offices of these demons or these lower spirits, or should I say more closer to earth, closer to the physical realm spirits, that their energies work more or less in beneficial harmony, or at least in fruitfulness for the magician, rather than causing them disruption, causing them spiritual, psychological, or physical ailments, which is shown time and time again that these beings will definitely do, because it's in their nature. They have a nature that is not necessarily in agreement with the person who wants to contact them. And there's a lot there. There's people that they jump right to demons. Oh, they're great in this and that and everything, but they have to pay attention. If your personal, your financial, and if everything else is kind of going through hell and you can't get things together and you're having a lot of conflict, that's something to really look like. If everything goes perfect from the get-go and everything's wonderful and you live and die that, then hey, I was totally wrong, and you're perfect in alignment to whatever that spirit was. That's fine. But as a typical practice, you find that that's not the case. That human beings need kind of a control center, something to help other energies align more sympathetic and a little bit more in agreement with what the magician's considerations are in the world. And it's not simple. It's not this whole good bad thing and how it's looked upon in the the religious world, so to speak. But it is something to take in consideration about these spirits do exist, and a lot of them are of considerable influence and intelligence, but they have their own thing going on. They have their own will and way that they work in the world. And it's, it doesn't mean just because you think they're great or, you read in a book that they're going to bring you riches, that if you come in contact with them, they're, you're going to get the positive aspects of that just because you want to, or just because you're nice to them. It doesn't work that way. I've never seen it work that way. So... Just saying.
Well, we could be here talking about this forever. Now, the thing is, there's a couple of questions about, I need to say to the listeners that you do go in detail about the preparation of the equipment, that it's necessary for this, and you go one by one and with detail, actually drawings of the symbols and sigils that are necessary to prepare for this, and of course other things as well, the invocations, the all of that is in the book. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is, in the moment of the actual invocation, what is the most important advice to follow?
Excellent question. And the moment, I think in the moment of the invocation, when you get to that point, which means that you have done the preparatory work, that you've been working on scrying, you've been working on practicing the ritual, you've set everything up, you've consecrated your implements, you've got all of your other magical ducks in a row, so to speak. The most important thing when you're in the midst of the invocation is to be completely present, to be completely with each word that you're saying, and to remove from your mind all expectation, all other distracting thoughts, and simply, for the sake of what you are doing, to be in that moment and one with what you're saying. So basically one with your word. And the power of this magic, when you are literally one with your word, you're in the sacred trinity, which means there's no separation between thought, word, and deed. And that is the alchemical process of making magic work. Mm-hmm. And when you can do that, and when you're in that process, you will know it, because you won't be thinking about knowing it. It will just be happening. You will not be worried about what's going on. You're not going to even really be in the sense of considering anything, not your tools, not any robes or anything that you're wearing. Even if somebody else is there, nothing. You're just one with the word and whatever is going on. So what you're saying is what is going on. And that's not something that you can't fake it. It either gets practice and you either get to that point as a magician or you don't. And hopefully you keep trying and eventually you do. But I mean, that is honestly the catalyst of making, this process work. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting place to be in, and there's nothing else like it, because there's no arguments, there's no questions, there's no nothing except for what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, you say that there is, this is the last question, you say that there is no limit to what we can learn from the work with these spirits and angels. How would you describe the benefit of this work into the life of those who have contacted these angels and spirits through the ritual of the drawing spirits into crystals?
The real work of the magician, and we can even extend this through the shaman, I would say some maybe traditional witches that actually work with spirits, but across traditions, people actually working with spirits, it is about relationship, and that's what it comes down to. It is about us being mediators between physical and spiritual worlds, and it is not about just contacting some being, asking for something, and then you banish them, and you don't really work with them again, or you summon them down like another year. And I'm really happy to say that a lot of my fellow magicians, at least the ones that I work with, that we're really coming into agreement on. This is a relationship building process. Once you achieve contact, that you build upon that you work with that, and that you really do give it the attention and respect that it deserves and that they deserve, and that the true magic, the real benefits, the kind of amazing benefits that can be acquired, that's written about in the grimoires, those are the results of working with these spirits on an individual basis over a long period of time, over developing and integrating the aspects of their office, of what their powers are, their purpose, and being able to integrate that into yourself, into your own workings. It really is a relationship. It's something that's built and transformed, and it really is a gateway. It's something that you step through, hopefully with them in agreement, and that you develop it from there. And then after this relationship is gained and it's worked on, you really start to see the benefits of what these spirits can do for you, and not only do for you in your life, but how you can help other people, how you can extend it and move it out through your life by not only your relationship with your spirits that you work with, but how that transcends to other people in your life, hopefully in a positive way, if you're working with the right spirits. Otherwise, it could be a disaster too, and then you're going to mess up everyone else around you too. Whatever waxes your magical wand, I like to say. So whatever does it for you.